Nataliya Melnyk.
Hi guys, feels good to be here. I wish it were under different circumstances. As many of you know, I've been here for a couple of days already, and I must say they've been filled with a number of revelations, and I'm gonna share just the biggest of them with you. So first of all, drop bears are indeed not real. And honestly, I'm not sure if I'm more relieved or disappointed by that fact. Another one is that when you guys talk about The Voice, you're not talking about a popular TV singing competition, which is also a bit weird, because I really thought you cared about it very much. Yeah, and then the next one is that by coming here and speaking at this event, it seems that I'm a fascist, on top of being a Nazi because I'm a Ukrainian. So yeah, that's a lot. I am indeed a Ukrainian, and in case you were wondering, not a Nazi, just like the majority of Ukrainians. Do we have some of them? Sure, because we are a democracy, and that's part of being a democracy. Like other things, you know, freedoms, rights, elections, and being able to tell your government when it's messing up. And we really love doing that in my country. Basically, experts on that, because about every 10 years we have a major revolution. And that's how I joined the free market movement, actually. So my first revolution was back in 2004, the Orange Revolution against the electoral fraud, but I was still in high school back then. So the first adult one is definitely pictured here. It's the Revolution of Dignity, which started as Euromaidan protests in 2013. So it started as a student protest against our president at that time, refusing to sign association and free trade agreement with the EU, despite the fact that the majority of Ukrainians wanted it, not because the EU is such a great organization, but in our mind, since we had been struggling with the Soviet past for so long, the EU meant better life for us. Unrealistic, but so what started as student protests was slowly dying down because it was getting cold outside. In November, it's not very pleasant to be spending nights out on the streets. Dying down until our wonderful police officers were sent to deal with a small group of students spending the night at the Independence Square, pictured here. So the kids got beaten up pretty badly. And that's when the adults joined the party, because in my country, you don't beat up kids without any consequences. So protests turned into something much bigger, against corruption, against police brutality, against overreaching government, and against absolutely abhorrent anti-protest laws, which were passed in January of 2014. And that's when protests got violent. But police used snipers to deal with the protests, as protesters were being kidnapped from the Independence Square on the way to the Independence Square, from hospitals after the beatings, and they were found either dead or even more beaten. So 108 protesters were killed, and 13 police officers. And at that point, a lot of young people like me, they realized that they wanted to make a difference. So we didn't just want to complain about our government or go live somewhere else. And at that point, we had three options. Option number one was to join the newly elected government. Option number two, to join the civil society that was actively developing at that moment, or join the army, because, as you know, Russia used that moment of weakness and disarray to invade Ukraine and annex Crimea. So I chose the second option, but before that, I think I need to address one of the misconceptions that exists about Ukraine. We actually elect our governments, you know, unlike our northern neighbors pictured here. So as you can see, we have a change of power. So in 2014, we had an unelected interim government for a couple of months, but then in May, President Poroshenko was elected in the first round, former representative of one of the biggest pro-Russian parties in Ukraine. He was one of 21 candidates. Then in 2019, another famous president was elected, Volodymyr Zelensky. He was elected in the second round, got more than 73% of votes, and he was running against 38 other presidents. That was the maximum in our history. And his party won the parliamentary elections by a landslide. And after that, for the first time, for a brief time, and for the first time in our history, we had a one-party majority in the parliament. And the interesting fact is that he was elected on a very libertarian platform, which was music to our ears. Because when I joined my organization, which is Bendukidze Free Market Center, back in 2016, the team had already organized massive anti-corruption forums around the country. The biggest one attracted about 5,000 attendees in one city. Then we were running policy reform agendas and you know, joining the fight against corruption, which was very well represented in our government and in our society. So what he was saying, those were all the right things. Like rule of law, finally, someone was not afraid to mention that in an electoral speech. Reforming the security service of Ukraine, which has been acting as a major player in economic policy because it's been monitoring every kind of economic activity in our country and actively intervening in it. Then finishing building anti-corruption institutions, which we started doing back in 2014, like anti-corruption court, anti-corruption prosecutor's office, and anti-corruption bureau. We really like, you know, the combination of anti-corruption in everything. So it's been a struggle. It's very difficult to expect the system to reform itself without very active intervention from the civil society. And when it comes to the you know, dealing with the lack of rule of law and corruption in my country, civil society turned out to be a very powerful player. But then, you know, we have another problem, another factor to deal with, and it is Russia. So we look very small compared to Russia, but I think we've proven to many people that we are very resilient. And unfortunately, we really had to. So when the war for us started back in 2014, well, actually, we can say it started back in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, and no one did anything about that. So annexation of Crimea, then pretending that they didn't invade our eastern regions, and then they were finally acting out in the open in February of this year. So the picture on the left is Kyiv, the morning of February 24th. That's the massive, you know, line of people trying to get out of the city. after 5:30 a.m. when we all woke up to the sounds of explosions all over the country. Second picture is also Kyiv. It's a shopping mall that was hit by Russians and completely destroyed. Doesn't look like a military target to me. This is actually my neighborhood, a couple of minutes away from my apartment building. That's where a Russian missile was shot down. People died, and you still see signs from that very unfortunate event. And this is what life had been for many Ukrainians since February, basically either staying underground for most of the days or spending nights there, because you would get air raid alerts all the time, and that's when you have to go to a bomb shelter. And in our country, the biggest bomb shelters are underground stations. So this is Kyiv, and basically our life froze at that point, because when you have air raid alerts 10 to 12 times a day, it's kind of difficult to find the time to do anything else. So this is Kyiv region during and after being occupied. It was a terrible time, and we are still learning a lot of things that were done back then, but obviously it's not over. This is an example of how Russia is liberating Russian-speaking population in my country, because two pictures on the left show you Kharkiv, two pictures on the right show you Mariupol. So both cities are the biggest Russian-speaking cities in Ukraine. And Russia has been methodically wiping out these cities and people living there. And that's what they call liberation. Throughout this nightmare that we've been living in for a long time, Russia has proven to be effective in a couple of things. First one, it's demilitarizing itself. Interesting fact is that Ukraine right now has more tanks than we started the war with, because they're actively donating them to us. Yeah, they don't really care about them that much. Well, obviously, liberating people, they're good at that. And, you know, helping NATO grow in Europe. So Ukraine finally applied for membership yesterday, or it was the day before yesterday. I'm not sure about the time difference. It's not gonna happen, but it's a nice statement from our government. And it has also been a massive uniting factor for Ukrainians. You know, we are outspoken, we like to argue with each other, but since February, we see that 98%, according to the survey back at the end of July, 98% of Ukrainians agree that we will win this war. You know, the highest level of us agreeing on anything. Since 1991, when 91% of Ukrainians voted for independence of Ukraine at the referendum. Then in August, 90% of Ukrainians said that they want to stay in Ukraine. From my perspective, it shows that the level of belief that my people have in our future, despite everything that's going on. And Russia has been very effective when it comes to Ukrainization of my country. As you know, we have a lot of Russian-speaking people, some of them ethnically Russian, some are their children. So in 2012, 57% of Ukrainians considered Ukrainian as their mother tongue. 10 years later, so in March of 2022, the percentage is 76. Yes, that's a huge increase. Then in July, there was a survey done in 10 mostly Russian-speaking regions that have most suffered from the invasion in February. And before the invasion, 73% of the people there used Russian in their everyday lives. After the invasion, the percentage is 56. And it's going down. So people are making a conscious decision to switch because they associate Russian language with all of this. And you know, yesterday and today, you guys talked a lot about fighting for freedom, for values, for families, and you know, all of these are the right things until you actually have to do the fighting. And that's what we're doing quite literally in that region. And you know, we're trying not just to defend the land, the buildings, and things like that. We are making sure that we really live by those values, and we're not ready to give them up. And that's an example. These are Ukrainian Students for Freedom. You might know the organization they came out of. It's Students for Liberty, a big international student movement. These are the guys on the front lines, either in the army or medical units. And these are the guys from the Ukrainian Students for Freedom who died fighting the Russian invasion, so aged from 22 to 27. So I want to end my speech by saying that I am a Ukrainian and I want to live just like they did. And I want my children to live in a free, prosperous Ukraine. And this is exactly what millions of Ukrainians are fighting for. And not just fighting, but we are ready to die for it. But it doesn't mean that we want to. And we will keep doing it until Russia gets out of my country and until we are able to go back to dealing with our issues, internal issues, on our own, including corruption, including finally cutting the umbilical cord that is tying us and has been tying us to our Soviet past, and building strong pro-market democratic institutions in my country. We are a democracy. We are a democracy with a lot of issues, but we're also a young democracy. And the fact that we have issues in my country does not in any way justify what Russia is doing to Ukraine. Thank you.